Welcome to the Agile Coaching Exchange this evening. So it's good to see you. It's nice to have so many people here for our Back to Basics session, which is obviously proving very popular. So it's going to be used truly today. I'm going to be your speaker. I mean, I could say some fancy words about myself, but I probably shouldn't. So what we're going to do is we're going to kick straight off and learn all about Kanban. I'm a go with the flow kind of girl. So if you've got a question, fire it in the chat, put your hand up, shout out, whatever you want to do, let me know. But I'd rather have those questions answered than have anything still left on your mind. So if you didn't know, I am the Kanban Queen. That is my alter ego. I love absolutely everything about Kanban, and so that's what I'm here to talk to you about this evening. Can everyone see my screen? Give me a sign. Yeah, perfect, perfect. All right, so I don't need to do this. I'll save myself 2 minutes because you know all about me. And so we're going to dive straight in with, where does Kanban come from? Who knows? Pop it into the chat channel or give me a shout out. Anyone? Where does Kanban come from?
We've got a lot of Japan in the chat.
Japan, Toyota. That's my fault. I didn't have the window open, did I? Didn't have the window open. So Toyota, Japan, Lean Six Sigma Japan, absolutely, Toyota. So Kanban dates back to the 1950s, just after the war. Companies like Ford were doing like super well. Companies like Toyota doing less well. And so they had to think differently about their business. And so that's when their match made in heaven happened. And they met a guy who came in and effectively revolutionized the way they think about things. And whenever I tell people this when it comes to Kanban, the first thing that often comes to their mind is, well, what we do is not manufacturing. And you're absolutely right. What we do is knowledge work, be it tech, non-tech, vending machines, legal, whatever it is that you do within your world. Kanban is ultimately there to help you to be able to manage your work. And that's what it's really about. But even though it comes from manufacturing, many of the principles which Kanban really is about still absolutely holds true. So Kanban, shocking statement, is more than just moving post-it notes. I know, it's more than Jira, it's more than post-it notes. So if you learned one thing tonight, that's it. So ultimately, Kanban is all about demand and capability. The demand being, if we look at your business, how much stuff is there to be done? So the work that's coming through from your portfolio, your book of work, whatever you want to call it. It's also about understanding your capability. So how many teams have you got? What skills have they got? What can they do? Where are the problems? So we need to be able to balance those two things. But to do that, we need to be able to understand it. So if we think about Toyota, what cars, makes, models, colors, how does it pass through the factory? What parts of the factory gets it blocked up? So these bottlenecks, what parts of the factory sit there idle for long periods of time? So it's all about understanding the flow of work as it goes through your system, the pain points, the points where you might have those bottlenecks, those starvation points, but also maybe where there's something that's more prone to break down. So even though that's very manufacturing led, if you think about your world, you're a network of services, you're a network of teams that sometimes have to get involved to be able to deliver a new warehouse, for example. So to do that, we have to go to lots of different teams to be able to get all of the information to be able to deliver that. So we need to think about how those people can work together. And remember, you're only as fast as the slowest part of your system. So ultimately, we need to understand that flow of work going through all of those teams, the demands, the capability, how can we ultimately get that done, and how can we smooth it through? In Toyota, they also introduced this concept of this pull signal, and that's what we do with our Kanban boards today. So if I know how many makes, models, cars, and colors are flowing through my system, I know how many widgets I need to be able to have near me to be able to put on the car and to continue their build. And so if we understand the work that we do in our teams, and if we understand how much of these things are coming through to us on a regular basis, we can make sure that we're prepared. We can understand how much stuff we can have in flight at any given point in time. And then as that work gets done, we can then start pulling that back through the ultimate system. And we control this through what we call work in progress limits within our system. So Kanban is ultimately a change management method. It's not a methodology. It's not a framework. I'm sorry if I'm breaking your hearts here. It's a change management method, something that we apply on top of our existing ways of working. So if you're currently working in a waterfall way of working, we pop Kanban on the top. If you're a scrummy team, then we put Kanban on the top of that. And we start with what we do now. And so we look to evolve from that current position. And we ultimately want to improve how you do your work, and that's the service delivery. So let's understand the services that we provide to our teams. I've got a bug, I've got a problem, I want a new feature, I've got an incident. These are the services that we have. And then if I spoke to any of you, you're going to tell me there's some good stuff, there's some bad stuff. And if we had a magic wand, I'd love to solve absolutely everything. And so that's the stuff where we need to ultimately improve our service delivery. Kanban is about catalyzing continuous improvement. Bad news, if you're here because Kanban's going to solve all your problems, probably best go have your dinner now, because it's not. But it's going to help you to see all of those horrible things that you've been hiding over the years. It's going to smack you in the face, and then we're going to have to work out how we're going to stop that from happening again. So ultimately, it's going to show us our problems through the visualization and the indicators that we're going to be looking at. So then we can then work out what needs to be different. But this is where it comes back to being a evolutionary change method. So if we think about Scrum, I love Scrum. I'm not slagging it off in any way, shape or form, but ultimately it's a revolutionary method. So hello team, let's change the way that you work, the way that you're structured. You're going to have a Scrum Master, a product owner, you're going to have some developers now. We're going to mix things up a little bit. And the reason why they do that is because ultimately they want a culture jolt. They want you to think differently about the work and how it should be done, and it is very successful. But equally, that doesn't work in every environment. So Kanban's evolutionary change says, hey, let's take a look at what you do now. Tell me the good, the bad, and the ugly. Let me think about the system that we have, and then let's work out what we need to change at your own pace. So it's coming from two very different perspectives, and it's probably got a lower barrier of entry, but you have to work harder to be able to evolve your team because you haven't had ultimately that culture jolt. So not a methodology, not a framework. Kanban is a method that you apply on top of your existing ways of working, and we evolve from there. And at its core, just to hit that message home, it's about demand and capability. So your office probably looks like this road. It's full of work coming through the system, and we have to work out what can we do to optimize our system to be able to achieve the results that we want. Because if we're honest, we can probably optimize things before we even get to the point where we need to have more people. Because it's not easy to get more people. You don't go to the magic cupboard and pull out a bob and then they're ready to rock. So that takes time, and that takes effort and money and cash. So ultimately, if we can understand what some of those challenges are, we can then work out how can we optimize the team as a whole. So we can't just swap in some new people. But you can tell us a live environment because I've got people behind me. Kanban is a way to match that demand and capability, and it's about encouraging flow. So if your organization looks like this road, how do we get things flowing again? And if you think about the road system, traffic lights, roundabouts, carpool lanes, there's a whole heap of things that you can do. And it's the same with you back in your office, but we just have to work out what some of those things are. So Kanban has a number of principles, and it has practices as well. So on the screen, delivery. For you, that service, it's about the type of work we do and how it gets done and how we think about it. So in reality, this is about helping us to understand that the way that we work is as a network of interdependent services. So if I need to build a new warehouse in Dunelm, I need about 7 different teams to be able to help me to get there. So I have to understand how those teams work together. And if I ask those teams, what's the number one killer thing that you would love to improve? They would probably say the dependencies with those other teams. Because quite often in our agile methods, we're very focused on improving the team, but we're not thinking about how those teams hand over between one team and another. And the organizations that I work in, I don't have the luxury of having beautiful feature teams like Scrum calls for. So we have to think about how our network hangs together. We also need to be really focused on what is the customer is asking us for. So what is it? Do we know the why and how those 7 teams to build me that warehouse is going to be involved and used? We also need to think about the work. So it is a misconception that Kanban is about optimizing people, micromanaging people. It's none of those things. And what we say is we want to be able to manage the work and let the people self-organize around it. So rather than having individual task by tasks on the board, we're interested in the thing that we're trying to deliver and what does it take to be able to do that. And as much as I love you all, I really don't care what you did yesterday. I don't care what you're going to do today because I trust you. I trust you that you're going to come and deliver our product and create something beautiful to the goals of our customer. And so you are the best people to be able to work out how that should ultimately be delivered. So let's trust our people. But, we're not amazing all the time. And so we need to review our network and we have to work out how can we improve. What does that really mean? Let's have retrospectives. Let's look at some of our data. Let's talk to the teams that we work with. Let's talk to the customers who we work with. Let's find out all of the good, the bad, and the ugly and work out what we can do to be able to improve from that point. So it's very data rich, be it feedback or looking at how quickly you can do things and how many problems and bugs that you've got. But we mustn't forget that ultimately the product that they're developing has to be something of value for the business, and we have to have relationships across those businesses. And so therefore we need to work out how we can smooth that flow. So these ones are all about thinking us as the services that we provide. And the change management principles. Remember, Kanban is a change management method. And so ultimately, we're going to start with what we do now. So this is about creating psychological safety, not attacking social identity. If someone came to you and said, hello, Helen, you're a project manager at the moment, but we're moving to Scrum and now you're going to be something different, that doesn't create a psychologically safe environment. And so therefore, we want to be different in Kanban and work out what it is that we want to be able to do. And so maybe we don't need to change those roles up in the beginning. So let's understand the existing process, the good, the bad, the ugly, and work out what's the goal? What's the thing that we're trying to achieve as a business? Because Kanban is not the goal. Scrum is not the goal. It's a means to an end to be able to help you to get where you want to be. So if your goal is to reduce the delivery time, increase the amount of work that you're getting done, improve the morale, we want to be able to talk about that. And then when we think about the way that you work, we're going to work out what part of the process doesn't help us to achieve those goals. So Kanban is not the end game. Ultimately, there's going to be some change. So we have to agree that we're all going to get involved in that. And everybody is going to be from the team level to the middle management level to the senior level, everybody, because change is going to be necessary. And so we want to encourage active leadership at all of those levels. And what that really looks like is you're going to need to take ownership of calling out when there's challenges and when there's problems within the team, but you're also going to need to take ownership in how you can solve some of those things. And so therefore you might be asked to lead on some of these initiatives within the team or maybe even wider than the team. And one of our core values is leadership. And so leadership is going to be important. And the good news is if you're a Scrummy-based team, you've already got that self-organizing, self-managing. And so that leadership is going to come a little bit easier for them. But ultimately, we want to create an environment where people are thinking and innovating, not just about the work they do, but the way they work and the way that they collaborate with others. Yeah. And this is supported by the different practices of Kanban. So number one, visualization. We have to see the work to manage the work. And so we need to build something beautiful to show what that looks like. But visualization on its own does not make you Kanban. Sad news, people. What's the one thing, pop it into the chat channel, what's the one thing that makes Kanban Kanban? pull, but what do we use to dictate the pull? There we go, J Deep, the work in progress limits. So the way that we control the demand and the capability, what Kanban is truly about, is by the work in progress limits. That's the core thing. So if you are going to be a true Kanban system, as a minimum, you need to have a visualization and work in progress limits that aren't just there for vanity purposes. People actually use them and obey them, not just there to turn the columns a pretty red every now and again. So we have to truly understand the composition of our teams, our services, and the way that we do things and work out what those numbers are. So work in progress limits are your second practice, but the thing that makes Kanban, Kanban. We're also going to need to manage flow, how work moves across the board, where it gets stuck, where it's empty for long periods of time. How long does it take to get across the board? How many defects fall out of the process? And so Kanban looks at slightly different data than what you might have within Scrum, but the stuff I'm going to show you, you can use in Scrum as well. Remember, these sandwich beautifully together. It doesn't have to be Kanban or Scrum. It can be a big old Scrumban sandwich if you like. And just as a little reminder, Scrumban is not a method in its own right. It's just a transitionary state between two different methods. Okay, so it's not a method in its own right. So we need to see the work, we need to control the work through WIP, we need to understand how are we doing and are we getting any better. We also need to be really clear about how we work. In Scrum, you might find a definition of done. An add-on to Scrum, you might have a definition of ready, whilst not technically Scrum, but ultimately, they're the same thing. It's what does it mean to navigate through this board and get the work delivered to our customer that's valuable? But explicit policies are a little bit more than your definition of done. It's also about what do we do if we have work for a long period of time on our board? What happens if something gets blocked and is waiting? How much stuff do we want to have in our backlog? How are we going to work as a team? And so it can be those rules of engagement. So if you think back to roads, it could be the road signs on how we're going to work as a team to be able to get from A to B. And we need to know if we're doing good. So we need to have some feedback loops. Scrum calls them events. Kanban calls them cadences. In reality, they're just meetings, improvement meetings, and delivery meetings to help us to be able to understand how we're ultimately doing with the work. Then we have to improve. So it's not good enough just to call out these actions and look at our data. We have to do something about it. So improve collaboratively, evolve experimentally using models and scientific methods. That's a longie. But what it really tells us is we need to have an experimentation-based mindset. Let's do some hypothesis-led thinking. So maybe we observe something in the system. We know we want to change it. What are we going to change it? What do we expect? Let's run some tests to see if we can improve it. And so these practices ultimately make up the depth of your Kanban application. You don't have to do all of them. Kanban doesn't explicitly tell you what you have to do in all of these, but you need to think about these. And this is where that leadership is really important. How are we going to understand the work? How are we going to talk as a team about the work? What do we need to do to make sure that the value gets delivered to our customers? So what's the key number one thing that we have to remember that makes Kanban Kanban?
WIP.
Three-letter anchor. That's it, Alan. Gold star to you, Alan. I will be handing out gold stars.
Hooray!
So I saw a question there that popped up. What is make policies explicit? They're like your definitions of done, rules and how you want the team to use the board or how you want to work. So that might be a policy that you have on the backlog that says if something's been there more than 6 months, get rid of it off the backlog because you're never going to do it. Yeah, it might say if something has become blocked for a week, what are we going to do then? Just leave it there to die? Or do we need to have some sort of process to be able to help us to move it off the board? So ultimately, that's what your policies are. So hopefully that helps, Sajid. So no board in Kanban is exactly the same. Bad news. So if they try and force your Jira and everybody has to have the same board, bad news, you're not particularly Kanban at that point. Teams need to have autonomy to be able to design their own boards and work out what that should look like. And every single board is going to look completely different depending on the industry and the work that you do. So Kanban is there to help you manage any work, not just your software deliveries. But if I had to pick a team that I've worked with in the past, the technology team, it might look a little something like this. Now, don't be fooled. It looks very sequential. Dev, test, review, deploy, and confirmation. They are not always like that. I work with teams where they run lots of experiments, dev, test all of the time. We would just design the boards in a slightly different way. So we have to understand your work before we can actually build what this looks like. So there's different patterns in how you're going to do it. But things that you need to think about when you're designing your boards is you need to understand the dominant workflow activities. So how does the work get done from A to B? And here you can see I've got dev, test, review, deploy, and confirmation to get things out of the door. These are my dominant workflow activities. Now you can see in development, I've got it split into two columns. That little dotted line, that's my buffer line. Now buffers, they represent working versus waiting. Working versus waiting. So the dev in progress, that's obviously a working state, but the ready to test is a waiting state. What's the implication on your lead time, i.e. how long work takes to get done, if you have lots of things in your waiting states? What do you reckon? That was a tough one.
Well, it's going to increase, isn't it?
It's going to increase. So you want to be able to understand on your board where the work builds up so you can then jump into action and decide what it is that needs to be done. So if we're having a load of work building up in test, if that happened, I don't know, once every 6 months because you do something special, I'm not going to worry about it. Just get the people to help out the testers and we can get the board flowing. But we need to achieve balance through those work in progress limits. And so if we're continually seeing a buildup of work in the ready for the test, that waiting is bad. And so we have to jump into action and ask the question, what is going on here? What do we need to do about this? So if it's maybe we've got more devs, maybe we need to have more testers, maybe we need to have less devs, maybe we need to have more automation. You're the experts of your own destiny. So you have to decide what that physically looks like. But it gives you a clue that there's a smell. And so I've buffered every single column out on my board because I want to see where all of those smells are, because then I can do something about it. But maybe, because my team is awesome, we've suddenly got continuous employment. And so therefore, I don't need to have a ready to deploy because it just goes out of the door automatically. Then you can just take the column out. So you don't have to have a static board all of the time. If you improve something, or maybe that's empty for long periods of time, then get rid of it off of your board. It's time to refactor. So your buffers are important and it helps you to see flow and whether it's happening on your boards. That's probably the one of the things other than WIP limits that I see missing in Kanban systems, because I doubt you're all perfect and I doubt work moves fluidly from dev to test. And so ask yourself the question, on your board, if you looked at it tomorrow, how much work is actually waiting versus being worked on? And that will actually probably shock you. And so you need to make that really, really visible. Work in progress limits. So it used to be called work in process. I think there's still lots of artifacts out there, Alan, which could call it that. But typically at the Kanban University, and remember there are different flavors of Kanban, then, we use the word work in progress. Samuel, I'd love to read that, but I can't read that and assimilate it as fast as I can. So if it's a question, write a short question. And so those WIP limits, typically you might see them across the board, but I'm going to show you some other patterns when we get there. But you can see that I've got my WIP limit of 3 across in progress and that ready to test. Now, I'm quite often asked, well, why is that, Helen? And if you think about it, it's about creating a behavior. Do I want my devs just to like throw a load of work across the test and not think about test? No, I want them to think about the system as a whole. So by binding the working versus the waiting state together, I'm always getting them to think about what's going on later on in the board, so then they can make some good decisions. Good decisions like, oh, I'm a developer and I don't have any more work. Let me have a look what's going on in the board. Can I help deploy something? Can I help review something? Oh, my testing friends, they look very busy. Can I help them test? If not, what do I pull next? And so you want to be able to create that holistic behavior across the whole team where they're thinking about how they collaborate. The opposite is called local optimization. I'm just going to think about testing and screw everyone else. That's absolutely not what you want, because they might make some decisions which could impact the rest of the way that we're working. Yeah. Other things to think about: swim lanes. You don't have to have them. In online tools, you can use different colors, you can use filters, labels, your world is your oyster. But where they are good is if you need to understand lots of different types of work that you do. So imagine I'm a busy checkout team. I might have different teams as for swims lanes. For work comes in from different teams, so I can see how much they're sending to me. Maybe I've got at the top, the newest product that I'm trying to sell. In the middle, I've got the one that's currently live, and at the bottom is the one that I'm trying to get rid of. And the beauty of this is you can actually put work in progress limits on the horizontals. So if I know that I can do 10 pieces of work per week, I could say 5 is spent on the top line and the rest, my math is not that quick, can be spent on the bottom 2 lines. And that way I can make sure that everybody is served all of the time. I always remember when we worked at ASOS and everybody was just maxed out on like shiny features. Ooh, shiny features. They always got prioritized to the top of the backlog. And all of those little small changes that made the difference to our business teams, they never get to the top of the column. And it wasn't until we made a decision where we have to do some shiny features and we have to allow for some of those smaller changes that we started truly servicing the needs of our business. So you can use it that way. Other things, class of service. So think of these as behaviors of the way that work is going to get done. So if all of a sudden I don't know, Amazon website went down or you couldn't make payments anymore, then that's probably a expedite or a major incident or a P1. You might have slightly different names. But the behavior associated to this is crap. It's costing us a lot of money. We need to fix this thing right now. Our customers cannot get their product. So the cost of delay of not doing this thing is here and it's now and it's potentially high, a monetary thing. The second most important one is a fixed date. So fixed date, there's no impacts to you until it hits a certain point in time. So imagine GDPR when that happened, where you can't send off your emails, you've got to get permission from everybody. As a business, if we hadn't had provisions on our website, we could potentially, if we got audited, be fined 10% of our revenue. And so therefore that could be quite costly. So everything is awesome until you get to the point where it's not awesome, and then the cost is high and the cost is now. So we need to be really mindful of these and work out when do they need to be done. Standard kind of says what it is on the tin. You've probably got rice, ice, weighted shortest job first, first in, first out. However you choose to prioritize that work within your business, that's your list of stuff in your standard column, and you just pull from the top unless you do not have the skills to do so. And then your final one is your intangibles. You don't know the benefit that you're going to get from this, but you know it's going to help the system. So that could be process improvements, that could be experiments that you run as a business. So as a person within the team, if I'm looking at work on the board, I need to be mindful of, Do I have any expedites? How can I help you? Do I have any fixed dates? Are we going to hit that date? If not, what's the next important thing for us to be able to pull? But also, how can we improve the process as well and have some of those different intangibles? So, class of service. I've done it very quick, but there's loads of literature out there that you can read about it. At the top, let's hit Ryan's question. At the top, you can see in my ready dev and test, I've got work in progress limit numbers. And the little symbol in review, deploy, and confirmation, these are infinity symbols. So it really means you can have as many things as you want in review whenever you want. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Good thing, bad thing? Yeah, you've got it. It's a bad thing. And the reason for that is because I remember when me and Doug, when I first met Doug, all of those years ago, he's shaking his head, don't tell any stories about when you met me. We worked at an insurance company and we sold a product to them. And what they would do is they would come to us and they say, we want this feature on our website and it's really urgent. You have to do it now. And so as a company, we would develop it and then we would send it off to review. And then it would take them 6 months to review that item. And there'd be like about 40 different items in there. Technically, that's pretty risky. And we're building on technical debt. And our developers have literally moved on to something else by the time they come back. So that is out of control. And so what we have to do is think about, actually, in reality, how many things can they take from us at any given point in time? And so what you want to do is get to a point where you could say, you can test 5 things. So then we're only ever going to deliver you 5 things, which means we can probably do some work for another customer. So in the beginning, you might have some infinity symbols as you get to understand, or you don't control every single part of your process. But if you want to get really good flow and understand your demand and your capability and not have bottlenecks within your system, you need to get some of those WIP limits where you don't have them right now. Yeah. Hopefully, Ryan, that's given you everything that you need. Controversial statement incoming. You can't move cards backwards on Kanban systems. I know. I saw the shock on your faces. So whilst nobody is going to die, no ferials will suffer if you do move cards backwards on your board, it is a symptom of a low maturity system. And so we want to increase the maturity of our teams. Now, the reasons, there's 3 that I can think of immediately, bearing in mind I've been up since 5 a.m. The first one is you're going to lose visibility. So if everything shuffles back, Ben does my testing. He says, Helen, your code is terrible. You need to do a whole heap of dev back on this. The temptation is to move those tickets back into dev, but now I can't see it. Think of your Kanban system as a big old information radiator. And so if Helen has 5 cards in test and 5 cards are blocked because my coding is terrible and I didn't bother testing it, I need that to smack me in the face. And I need somebody to say, we need to do something about that. So we don't want to lose visibility of the work. Number 1. Number 2, moving things backwards, you're going to blow up my work in progress limits, and they're really important to me. And number 3, the most important is most of us use electronic tools these days. And as that tool moves through the board, it's counting how long does it spend in development, how long does it spend in test, how long is it spending with a blocked indicator on. That's really important to me because we use that data to forecast how long work is going to take. And beautiful Jira, unless you're an absolutely whiz at underlying workflows, let me know if you are because I need that help. Every time you move tickets forwards, it's all good because the system automatically does that. But if you're jumping backwards and forwards, then I'm losing where that was and how long it sat there for long periods of time. And so your data becomes less, this is an oxymoron, but it becomes less accurate. But ultimately, I then can't make good estimating decisions based upon that. So we don't move things backwards. We don't move testing back. To hit Sajit's question, what about priority changes, scope creep, and things like that? Well, you've got a decision. If we get into the development and all of a sudden we realize that actually we've missed something fundamental out, let's have a chat about it as a team. Does it need to stop therefore we're going to abandon the work and it goes back to the drawing board? Or can we deliver the ticket that I've got on the board and follow it up with another ticket a little bit later on? You have to decide that, but ultimately you don't want to be moving them back every single week. So that's why on my board I have waiting, blocked, or on hold as a swim lane. So I can move things down. So it's still in my WIP limit, because that's what we're meant to do. And I can see exactly what column it's currently blocked in. That's a good insight. And it's not going to impact my data in any respect. So switch here. Move it from being a vertical to a horizontal. It's not going to screw with your data, and you're not going to have necessary to move things backwards all the time. And the risk is waiting, blocked, on hold can become a dumping ground. So you need to have probably a WIP limit, or you need to have some explicit policies around how frequently do you look at these things. And the other things, the final two things on this slide, I'm already behind, but let's just go with it. Abandoned. So abandoned, anything that's thrown away from the commitment point onwards. Oh, that's new. So the commitment point on this board is the ready column, because it's the point where you're like, dude, you're going to get your feature in 5 days. So you're making a commitment to the customer. Now, is it good or bad to suddenly find out in development that the work is not what it was expected to be and you need to throw it away? Is that good or is that bad? Bad. Thank you, Alan. Thank you, Doug. So we need to know how much of this is actually happening. So if you are a team that once you start the work, you find out that your product owner changes their mind or something happens and you throw it away, then move it down into the abandoned column, and then we can work out how much is that costing and what's the abandonment rate. If you're in Jira, you would have a done column. So you have a done, and you'd have a done abandoned. So then you can track and it doesn't mess up with your data. So abandoned, we need to get a handle of that. If you're always delivering all of your stuff, happy days, you do not need the abandoned column. But discarding or abandoning at this point is bad, because think about ABBA. They talk about money, money, money. Let's just throw it down the drain, because that's realistically what you're doing. So let's work out what we can do to try and solve that. Okay, who knew I was so funny? So abandoned. And this is a downstream board. Think downstream delivery, downstream doing, the double Ds. So this is where the work gets done. So if you throw things away off this board, money, 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 think about those ABBA moments. The time to throw something away is upstream. So boards that sit above this, I'll come and tell you about that another day. But ultimately, we need to make sure that we're keeping our backlogs nice and lean. We're throwing away anything that's not valuable or going to help ultimately the goals of our business. So that's where that discarded comes in, more of that upstream style. So Ryan's saying, I've just joined a team that doesn't have a queue column, starts with the ready for dev. Seems a bit of an issue. Well, it depends where your list of work is. You might call it something else, a product backlog, a queue, like options. There's normally a list of something somewhere. Queue is just ultimately all of the work that needs to be done by that team. Ready is the point where you're committing to that work and getting it done. So you don't always have to have loads of columns on your board. You can pop it onto your ticket design. Most online tools will allow you to do this these days. For example, testing. There's not just one type of test, is there? There's performance, security, SOAP, pen. There's a whole heap of them. And so we don't need to have all of those columns on the board because they don't happen that frequently. So think about putting them on your ticket so you've still got the information, but you don't need to make them visible. And the final thing on here is we need to understand how long work has taken us. So we talk about this concept of lead time at the Kanban University. Other methods use the word cycle time. God, if we were here all day, we could probably debate which one is the right one or which one's the wrong one. The key thing is you measure stuff, and in your organization, you know what you mean when you use the word cycle time or when you use the word lead time. For me, Lead time, your system delivery lead time, is from the point that you commit a piece of work to the point that you deliver that piece of work. So we can understand how long that work has taken us. And ultimately, we need to think about those infinities again. So where is out of control? So in reality, as a team, I can't, if I'm having to send off to another company, I nearly named the company then, I can't send it off to them. I then time how long it takes me to do my piece of work. And in reality, I know how long it takes end to end. I know how long devs take. I know how long tests take. I know how review take. I know how long it's blocked for. All of this stuff you can leverage from the lovely backend system within your online tools. So the key here is we need to measure some stuff. We'll get there at some point. And I'm really behind now. You can have Kanban as a scaled system. So Kanban has already got everything you need. You don't need to buy another product, Scrum, Nexus, whatever, Safe. You don't need that. Kanban has got everything you need within it to be able to control the flow of work through your organization. Such as you can use what we just talked about, level 1 systems, quoting Klaus Leopold here, flight levels. You can have team boards, so uncoordinated teams. If you think about Dunelm, there's a whole like 30 of them back then. So you might have lots of these boards. But for me to build that warehouse, I need 7 of them to work together as a cohesive unit. Easier said than done. But you can then have different levels of Kanban boards to coordinate their working, give them that single view of prioritization. So you can use level 2 systems to coordinate them together. You design it in exactly the same way. And you can also have project or strategy boards, which represents the work that your business is doing. So some businesses, they might have a board that's for OKRs, which then translate into a board for the projects they're working on, which translates to the coordination that they're working on across the different teams, down to line of code that the team produces out of the door. So there's slightly different principles. If you come to the Kanban Coaching Exchange this month, Dan Brown will talk to you about scaling Kanban. He'll give you more details around that. But ultimately, Kanban has got everything in that you need to be able to do that. So we also need to think about those WIP limits. And WIP limits are there to help you work together, swarm. It's probably all a phrase we're familiar with. It's going to think about the flow across the system. It's going to help us to be pull. So rather than pushing a load of work in, I pull to the capability that we've got within the team. It's going to help us to focus on lots of smaller things. Myth that they all have to be the same size. We just have to know what work you do. Are they small, medium, or large? And then your data is going to tell us absolutely everything else. And we need to focus on finishing the work and balancing the board. So think about those buffers. What are they telling you? And do we have lots of work waiting? So WIP limits is about reducing multitasking. And if we can cut that out, then we can ultimately improve the delivery rate of what it is that we do. Delivery rate, throughput rate, sometimes used interchangeably, really just means how much work do we get done. And there's some science that sits behind work in progress limits. I haven't got time to go through in massive detail today and to quiz you. I know you'll be sad, but it sits there with Little's law. So Little's law, it's irrefutable, comes from queuing theory, but ultimately it talks about the relationship between amount of work you have, the average work in progress, your average lead time, how long it takes you to get that thing done, and it talks about your delivery rate. So these 3 things are bound in a triangle. So if you impact one, the others will change. So if I have a team that is multitasking 10 different things, and I've only got 3 people, they're all going to be in the waiting column, aren't they? Because they're not actually being worked on. So every single time you context switch between one piece of work and another, what was I doing? Gerald Weinberg wrote a whole book about the cost of context switching. Every time you do that, you lose 20% of the total task effort. So if we reduce how much our work in progress is per person, then ultimately, we're cutting out the time it takes waiting, which reduces your lead time. And if you reduce your lead time, you increase your delivery rate, aka how much stuff you get done. So if you cut out the multitasking through reducing your WIP, if you improve the process through making stuff better, then your delivery rate is going to have a positive effect and you're going to get stuff more done. That was terrible English. But ultimately, three things are absolutely bound together. And so your Scrum Master might say, let's just do these WIP things, and nobody wants to do them. But there's a real reason that sits behind that. And so if you're going to introduce these to your team, think about the why. Like, people just want to know why we do these things. Give them the story of Little's Law. Play a game with them, like the name game, something where you're doing context switching. Talk to them about Gerald Weinsberg's book. And most importantly, let them come up with the numbers for themselves about their WIP limits and then gradually reduce them over time. So, thinking about those WIP limits, I'm going to do this. You can do this, Helen. How do we set and maintain them? There's lots of different ways. But if some friendly consultant comes up to you and says, I've got this magic spreadsheet that will tell you what your work in progress limits are, do we believe them or do we not believe them? They're lying. There is no magic spreadsheet. It's just something that they've come up with. So how do you do it? You have to think about, who have you got within the team? Who are they? How many? And what skills do they have? How much work are they currently doing? How much work is coming in? If I try and create a work in progress limits that's too strict, my team's going to throw down, say it's not working, I don't want to do this Kanban thing anymore. So maybe you have to start a little bit higher and then gradually reduce them over time. My little rule of thumb, each person can probably work on two things at any given point in time. Work in versus waiting in a queue somewhere. So if I've got 5 devs, then maybe I've got a WIP of 10 to spend across my board, wherever they do that work. But that's not hard and fast, because if I work in application support, people are rubbish at writing tickets. And so there's inherently way more waiting in the system. So maybe I need to have a higher work in progress limit until I've got my ticketing system and my triaging up and running. And so therefore better tickets are coming through to me and I can reduce those WIPs. Other places might be slightly different. So you have to make that decision. Equally, if you've got junior people, if you've got people that are mobbing or coding together, pair programming, like that's going to impact your WIP limits as well. So look at your board currently, how many people you've got, what skills, what does your team think? And then whatever number you pick, that's the number that you go with. And then watch to see what happens. Have we got things in the buffers? Have we got people sitting around idle? That's the stuff that's going to help us to understand, have we got them right? There's different ways that you can set your WIPs. I've got a few examples. Obviously, at the top, per discipline, so dominant workflow activity. You can also have them, I told you about the ones on the swim lane. These are called capacity allocation. Sometimes we use terrible words in Kanban. That's one of them. Capacity allocation. And you've guessed it. If you want to be a super duper ninja work in progress controlled board, you're going to have them going in both directions. But equally, maybe we just don't know right now. And we just need to experiment and see what happens. So the lowest maturity WIP you can have is a per person WIP limit. So in my team, nobody can have more than 3 things in flight at any given point in time across the entire board. Does that seem right? I don't know. Let's give it a go and see what happens. So you're still controlling WIP because maybe you need to explore what's going on a little bit more, but you would want to evolve them over time to something a little bit more like the ones ultimately at the tops of your columns. And then, like I said, apologies, I meant to scroll the chat. And then, like I said, you know, is work flowing? Have your columns turned red? Your biggest source of Armo WIP limits right is your team, because they will whinge. So you're going to know instantly if these are working for you, if you're not. But you need to give them time. And in the beginning, they might be changing until you've got them settled. And then after that, they're probably only going to change as people join or leave the team. You don't change your whips if someone goes on a 2-week holiday. You don't change your whip if Ben goes off sick for 2 days. If he wins the lottery and he's not coming back for 6 months, yeah, I probably need to change the whip limits at that point. But other than that, it's only really when people join in the team and as you're balancing and improving what it is that you're doing. So we also need to look at some data. I've still got 3 practices to go. I'll do it. We're going to need to look at some data. Maybe that's another session. But we've got charts that help us to see how are we flowing, the cumulative flow diagram. Think about Aquafresh toothpaste. It should be thin, minty stripes moving in an upward right direction. That's your goal. Here, less so. It looks like the kids have jumped on it, doesn't it? Which in reality is what a lot of CFDs look like. But it tells us how much work have we got in progress? Is that normal? Are we reducing our whip? Do we have evenness in our flow? Where the lines meet, starvation, you're running out of work. Where the lines expand, you're bottlenecking. There's a problem. There's something we've got to explore. And actually, any of these charts, you need to create psychological safety. You also need to remember that behind all of them is a story. So just because your line's getting fatter, it doesn't mean that the team is doing something bad. It might just mean that they've put an improvement in place and they're now awesomer and they're getting more work done. So you need to sit down and talk to them about what's going on here. So your 3 gateway charts into Kanban, the cumulative flow diagram. Your second one is your lead time histogram. So how long does work take to get done? And your third one is really a trend. So your lead time histogram will just show you this is all of the data for the last 3 months, for example. The important thing is, as a team, are you trending up or are you trending down? If you're trending up, we need a chat. Tell me those reasons and then work out what we can do differently. So there are oodles of charts that you can look at within Kanban. Tools like Jira do have its limitations. Tools like Nave, Actionable Agile, they are definitely the ones that I tend to use in my life because they've got exactly what it is that I want to be looking at. Burn downs are very much a Scrum thing, not part of what we do here. Burn ups, yeah, if we think about a burn up, that tells you when is work likely to be done. We also use Monte Carlo forecasting. If you've got a single piece flow, what does that mean? It means you deliver 1 tick and it's done. You can use estimation directly from your lead time distribution chart. But if you've got a big ass project and you've got 100 different stories you've got to deliver, you're going to need maybe a burn up, or maybe you're going to need to have some kind of other way of doing it. And there's loads of great videos out there. So if you look on the Kanban Coaching Exchange on mine and Ben's YouTube channel, there's videos from people in there that you can have a look at. So we need to look at our data and we need to talk about it. We need to create some policies. Policies, like we talked about earlier on, entry, exit into the different columns. You might have a policy that says, what does it mean to truly be an expedite, that kind of ticket that gets prioritized everywhere else. Ultimately, as a team, you need to sit down and agree and decide what they are going to look like. If you've got definitions of done and definitions of ready, you've already got a great start. We also need to think about some meetings, our cadences, we call them, not to be confused with Scrum cadences, which talks about a time box. But as an individual team, Kanban doesn't tell you that you have to do any of these. It just says you need to think about what work are you doing next, and that is your replenishment meeting. So if I know that my team can deliver 5 things in a day, what are the next 5 things that we should be working on? This is not sprint planning. This is not refinement. It is literally what 5 things do you want, and is there any logical order or challenge to that? We also need to come together daily to have a conversation about that. So let's stand around the board. I don't care what you did yesterday or what you're going to do today. I'm going to ask you questions like, what's standing in your way, JD? Are you going to deliver this on Wednesday like you said you are? What support and help do you need to be able to get this across the line? Does anyone not know what work they're doing? Can we still meet our goals? That's the kind of things that I'm asking. 15 minutes, the same time, same place, every day. Workflow replenishment is probably a 20-minute thing. And then the flow review. In Kanban, we have like different levels of meetings. And this starts off life as a retrospective. So flow review is a form of retro. So think about, you still need to talk about the people. You need to give your team a hug. You need to talk about the good, the bad, the ugly. But also, now we've got all of this lovely data and you're telling me that we're trending up and how long work has taken us, then let's get around that data. So the flow review is around the board. Let's plan out what we see. Where's the buffers? Where's the bottlenecks? What does our cumulative flow tell us? What does our lead time distribution tell us? What actions do we want to take as a team? If you're interested, the third level, they actually called it a service delivery review, but it's still a retrospective, talks to your customer. Whoa, how often do we actually go and say to our customers, like, how was that thing that we delivered for you? Was that good? Was that bad? How can we work better together? We very rarely do that, but that's your next level. And there are actually lots of cadences. Caveat, Kanban says, think about these things. Maybe you do some of them already. Maybe you want to adjust what you do, or maybe there's some inspiration in here to help you to decide what it is that you can think about next. It looks like there's a lot, but the different colors are the different Kanban maturity models. That's definitely another day. But you can see this is about what work do we do? This is about a retro. This is about how we set our strategy as a business. This is about progress of work. Are we going to meet our deadlines? And how are we managing our risk within our business? So there's lots of things for you to ultimately have a little think about. And finally, hypothesis-led thinking. Ultimately, we don't need to create one within Kanban because there's a gazillion different models already out there. If you think back to Toyota, they had A3 thinking. Realistically, all of these models are very similar. I noticed that there's a problem in how we do our testing. So I'm going to observe what it is that I'm seeing. Next, I'm going to plan. What do we need to do? Where do we need to get to? Do I want to put in automation and therefore reduce testing by 20%? What does that look like? What's my plan? What am I going to do? And then let's do that thing. Let's put it in place. And then we're going to check. So did that give me my 20%? Did it give me 50% or did it give me 2%? Let's analyze that. And then let's decide what it is that we want to do. Do we need to start again and put some more stuff in? Or is what we've done good enough? So ultimately, you know, they're the kind of models. They all roughly have them, but they're slightly different names. So there's lots of them out there. Ultimately, use your data, use your team, talk to your team. You must never forget them and work out what improvements ultimately you want to make. So, 2 minutes over. Kanban is about evolution. You don't have to be magical on day one. Think about your team next week. What's the one small thing that you can take from this that you can do differently? Maybe you mix up your stand-up. Maybe you start having a little look in Jira at some of your charts. Maybe you think about how work flows and maybe you're going to add in the buffer, or maybe you're going to switch on how you do your weighting. That's a small evolution that's going to help you. Lots of small incremental changes. We try and avoid radical change, but sometimes you get to the point where you might need to make one, but don't lead with that thing. So ultimately, it's psychologically safer to evolve from where you are now. Trust the team. They will give you the information about what's working and what's not working. And where you end up is not I'll hit that again. Where you end up is not where you expected to, but ultimately you'll end up in the right place over time if you continue to talk to the team, evolve, and think about the wider needs of your business. So Kanban looks really simple. Your developers want to move to Kanban because they think it's easier than Scrum. But in reality, you have to be way more disciplined because you have to create your own ways of working and innovate as a team on how you get that work done. And that's how you evolve to those higher levels of maturity. But remember, your first port of call is start with what you do now and work out how you can make that small change.